Hey guys, welcome to the Great Debate Community. My name is Richard. Today we are arguing about gods. That is the topic of the discussion. I've got General Han Solo here and Jim from the Atheist Edge show. The Atheist Edge has gotten some pretty big names on their show. They've gotten just professors like Sean McDowell. They've gotten notorious atheists like Aaron Ra and a few other guys, and most of the guys on the GDC know General Han Solo. He's a physics student, currently working on his master's at the University of Western Australia. And today, the basic topic is to talk about the existence of God. So usually in the GDC, we just have like an open link so anyone can join. We're going to do that later. Like I'm going to let people in maybe in 45 minutes or an hour or something. And but for now, I just want to have a kind of a one-on-one discussion so we can hear what Jim and Robert have to say without being overshadowed by everyone else. Because, you know, sometimes in these discussions, you guys know, people are talking over each other and nobody feels like they can get the word in. So I thought this would be good just to start out, since Jim here is our special guest, so we would give him the floor. Why don't I start with you, Robert? We are arguing. Oh man, got some dogs.
Yeah, sorry about that. That will happen from time to time. I apologize.
Yeah, I like how my name's mentioned in the dog's bark.
Robert. Okay, it didn't work. Okay, Robert, I'll start with you. Since we are arguing about gods, plural, today, why don't I pose to you a common atheist scholarly argument? Okay, so you have this pantheon of gods, and you apply this standard to all of them, where you conclude that these gods don't exist. Robert, why don't you apply the same standard to the God of the Bible? If you did that, you'd be an atheist, and you would realize that your God was just like the rest of them. And we'll hear your response and get some interaction from Jim.
Maybe to clarify that in another way, you're saying that the typical atheist response is you're one more God or something like that. Like
like I only believe in, or I go one God further than you do. That kind
of. The interesting thing is that studying the ancient Near East and the mythologies in the ancient Near East and how the Bible aligns with that, I am a monotheist, but I am the type of monotheist that doesn't actually deny the existence of other gods. So when an atheist makes that charge, I just look at him and go, no ancient Israelite thought like that. And so then, I guess then I just have to wait for the response after I say that.
Okay, so you leave the window open for the existence of other gods, possibly. But, okay, I assume the one God you do believe in is Yahweh, the Christian God, correct? I don't know if
yes.
Okay. Yep. So that being the case, you follow that instruction book, 66 books known as the Holy Bible. And in there, I can't quote verse and chapter, but I'm pretty sure it makes it very clear that if you are to follow him, he's the truth, the way, and the light. There's no other before him. And
right.
And I think it's even in the 10 Commandments. You'll have no other gods before me. So if you are a true believer in Yahweh, I don't see how you could even leave the door open.
No, those are good passages. So for example, let's take the 10 Commandments one, let's take the Shema, the Deuteronomy 6 passage. Or even in Isaiah, like a lot of Christians who have a certain denominational lens, so to speak, kind of like say the Reformed Christians and Protestants, they immediately react and say, "Oh, hang on a second, what makes sense?" Well, when you look at the nuance of the language of "there's no other God beside me," for example, Babylon uses that same phrase. Babylon in Isaiah says, "There's no other nation beside me." Well, naturally, it's not to imply that only Babylon exists. What Babylon is suggesting is that ontologically, Babylon is unique amongst the nations. And that's why you have this, the term echad can mean uniqueness. So Yahweh's unique among the gods, and he's the only one who renders judgment within the divine council. So if an explicit passage to go to that explicitly doesn't deny the existence of other gods is Psalm 82, that entire chapter. And yeah, and then I just go from there based on any other questions you may have.
Well, I don't have the time right now to hit Psalm 82. Just give me a brief rundown. I mean, what's the basic rundown of that, and how does that apply?
Okay, so Psalm 82 is a psalm, a summary psalm of okay, let me just back up a little bit. So after the flood of Noah, you have the nations being generated from the sons of Noah. You see this highlighted in Genesis 10. Then in Genesis 11 is the story about how humanity somehow migrates back to a unified singular entity with the whole Tower of Babel stuff. And then you have God spreading out, dividing the nations, causing confusion, changing the language, and so on. And then in Deuteronomy 32, so Deuteronomy is a sermon by Moses recounting to the next generation of Israelites how they came to exist. And near the end of his sermon, he basically asks the question in Deuteronomy 32, verse 7 onwards, how did Israel come to be? And in verse 8, he says, when the Most High divided up the nations, he gave, according to their inheritance, gods to be under their control. And how we know that's a correct rendering is because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Unfortunately, the King James says sons of Israel. But Psalm 82 then highlights that in summary statement, that God in the divine council, the gods that did not do what they needed to do in the council out, and they were subjugated to the nations. So that's what Psalm 82 is about. Okay.
Is that more or less a complete contradiction of, I think it's John 14, maybe 14:6, saying that no one can get to heaven but through me, through Jesus? I mean, it's either...
No, it's not a contradiction of that, not at all.
Yeah,
because in John 10, Jesus quotes from Psalm 82.
Hold on, Robert. I think we should clarify what we're saying here. Are you saying that you should follow these other gods? Maybe you should clarify that.
No. So what I'm saying is, people who did not align themselves with Yahweh were automatically subjugated to other gods. So that explains how their religions even came to be.
Okay, wow. I mean, that's kind of a minority viewpoint. You'd agree with that, though, right? As far as theists, they don't believe any other gods exist. Period.
I can name quite a few conservative Christians who specialize in ancient Near Eastern literature and Second Temple Jewish literature that would have no problem with that. In fact, there's no problem about this in the early church as well.
And these are pious individuals, pious Christians that still leave the door open for the existence of other gods. That, it seems to me like, I mean, this is a first heard for me. I've never talked to a theist that's thought that, but it could be just me.
That's where I was even just before we went online. This is unfortunately the ivory tower of theology, where the scholars, gather together and they talk about this stuff. You have who are the biggest voices in Christianity? It's the layman. It's those who have a filter on, like a certain denominational filter.
Yep.
15th century, 16th century Reformation filter. That's the theology of first century Christianity. I'm sorry, that's it's ridiculous. And those who specialize in the original languages, and when you go back to the source material, it gives you a whole different meaning.
Well, that's mind blowing.
Jim, something else to consider is that throughout the centuries, scholars have discovered more. Like we might not have known this stuff a few centuries ago because we didn't know as much about the ancient Near East. So as we learn more about the culture, that impacts how we interpret the Bible, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are you in line with this too, Richard, or?
Yeah, a good book if you're really interested in this is The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser. It's really good. He's an evangelical Christian, and he's a scholar of the ancient Near East. So it's pretty.
Unseen Realm. Okay.
The Unseen Realm.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay, Jim, we've kind of given Robert the floor to lay out his view. So why don't you take over now? Why don't you tell us why are you an atheist, and then we'll get some interaction from Robert.
Let me preface that with a shameless plug for my book.
All right.
Most people believe in God. Can they all be wrong? It's available at fine bookstores everywhere. I have another book that I wrote under a pseudonym that attacks Islam in the same fashion that I'm not going to give the name on air, but if you want to PM me or if anyone wants to PM me, I'll give it directly. But this one is just for Christianity. And the reason I wrote it, definitely not for any reason like royalties. It was 25 of the most popular questions that I'm always asked by theists, and it was clinking around in my head, and I was tired of repeating myself. So I'm just going to refer to it from time to time, but these are my words. So as far as the existence of God, I don't know. I'll just throw something out there. All right, let's see. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Let's see. I'm sure you've heard this one before. The four Gospels, there's obvious contradictions. It sounds like Matthew, Luke, and John are copying off of Mark, Mark being the first Gospel. Mark ends, the original versions of Mark end in chapter 16, verse 8. I think from verses 9 through 20 were added at least a century or two later. And those, the original book of Mark ended with Jesus, the women coming to the empty tomb, seeing that the tomb was empty and running away in fear and not telling anyone, quote unquote. All right. And all the resurrection, the post-resurrection story was added later. And then thusly, Matthew, Luke, and John followed suit. You can still hear me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. And that being the case, I've always found it interesting how you could put your entire worldview, faith, onto something that was pseudepigraphical, I think is the word. It was, interpolated. It was added later.
Pseudepigrapha, yeah.
Yeah, pseudepigraphical. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe we can start there. Like, if these accounts are true, why were they added later by early church fathers? Why? I don't know where you stand on if the Gospels were actually written by who they say they were, which I think the preponderance of evidence indicates that they were written anonymously decades after the death of Jesus. I don't know if that's where you want to start, or I can switch to something else.
I could just briefly respond to that and say that I don't deny that the Gospels were written. I know scholars will try and put Mark in the early 40s AD, and but there's no so-called physical evidence. Like there's no manuscript that dates to that period. And but one thing's for certain is that the early church, when you look at the ante-Nicene church fathers, they did speak about the four Gospels in such a way that when they quote the New Testament, and in fact not just the Gospels, but when they quote the entire New Testament, they quote practically the entire New Testament except for 6 verses, which is curious because we can go back to the start of the 2nd century, and you already have the majority of the New Testament already in their minds. So I wouldn't say that the church fathers so-called invented these Gospels. But at the same time, I will say that it is true that the New Testament was written down very close to the 70 AD temple destruction period. So that means you're talking about a 30-year gap between, say, the 30 AD crucifixion of Jesus and, say, around 60 AD when the Gospels were started to be written. And so then that's where, curiously, in Second Temple studies, scholars who devote their time about Judaism in the BC period, there's a lot of material in that period which you can call pseudepigraphical, So like the Book of Enoch, for example, and a lot of the Dead Sea Scroll material, that align a certain theology that the early followers of Christ, and in fact Jesus himself, they only needed that material to voice the gospel message. They didn't. There was no such thing as, oh, we need to have like a New Testament written down to, you know, spread this message out. You see this in the Book of Acts. They're always relying on a certain type of oral tradition and the Old Testament as so the point is you already have an established canon, in this case the Old Testament, to then, you know, bring about this gospel message. And I guess only when it started to get killed off, then they needed to write the stuff down, and that's what you see happen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if that exactly explains it, though. You could see how it'd be a problem for me if like I think it's the early the earliest full copies we have. I think it's the Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus. Yeah, with Mark ending where it does, it's just very suspicious. It's very dubious. I don't know if you can understand how an unbeliever would say that that's good evidence that, you know, if there's been embellishments, if it appeared in the very first copies. I know oral tradition dated way prior to that, but it just seems problematic to me. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I would recommend a very recent treatment, which, so I personally don't hold to the longer ending of Mark, but a very recent treatment which caused even Craig Evans to like change his mind, so to speak. I'm sure you know about Craig Evans, the New Testament scholar. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was published in 2014. It's by a guy named Nicholas Loon, and the title of it is "The Original Ending of Mark: A New Case for the Authenticity of Mark 16:9-20." I haven't fully finished that book, but he makes very interesting arguments about why it should be included. And curiously, what he tries to do is he tries to reverse engineer certain interpolations by scribes because of the events you see in Acts. And curiously, there's a lot of, believe it or not, they use the theory of evolution in regards to cladistics, and how cladistics brings about an evolution of species. They're using that with respect to textual transmission and how words or letters will evolve. And he's done it in such a way that you can actually figure out maybe what the original ending would have been, which is a lot shorter and different to what we have in the King James Version, but reads a lot more authentic, because the one that we do see in the King James Version seems to be practically kind of like a biography of Paul, you know, being bitten by snakes, and you know, no snakes can kill you, that sort of thing. And that's what you read about in Paul. But you know, if Mark is before Paul, then you know, it's like kind of like a prophetic statement. But that's not what's being mentioned, and it's very unusual for Jesus to say something like that. So, well, we know. I recommend that book.
Yeah, I'm sure we can agree that Mark came way after Paul. Is that not? Do we not agree on that?
No, I'm going by the consensus that it would be dating Mark back in the 40s, or even 50s.
I think the preponderance of evidence there dates Mark closer to late 60s and around the destruction of the temple in 70, right?
No, that would fit something like Matthew.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, well, I mean, reverse engineering, that's one option. I mean, all options are on the table, but it's just, I don't know if I find it exactly satisfactory, though.
Hey, Jim, so there are a couple things that came to mind. Maybe you can give me your thoughts on that. So I wonder if the fact that we can identify passages like the long ending of Mark is kind of points to the fact that a lot of Mark would be authentic, because we can actually identify what is inauthentic. See what I mean? So we can look at the earliest manuscripts and see, hey, this wasn't in there. you know. So wouldn't that be kind of a big deal?
Yes. Okay, a couple problems. If Mark was actually written by a contemporary of Jesus, someone that knew him, an eyewitness, which again, I don't think there's a consensus on that. I think actually the consensus is the other way. I think all four gospels were written by intelligent Greek scholars that had a very limited knowledge of the greater Jerusalem, the Galilean area.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking about like what Mark originally said. Like, are you using the long ending of Mark to say something like
okay.
What Mark originally said?
Oh, well, yeah, but okay. Well, just the fact that even the original, the oldest copies we have that include Mark up to 16:8, it's still late and fake, in my opinion.
What do you
mean? It was written too late. It was written anonymously. It was given. These gospels were given their titles later. The original versions of the gospels don't have titles. They don't have. They were Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John were attributed to these books much later.
Yeah, it's because they're letters. Like or something delivered to someone else. Like if I were to write you a letter, I wouldn't write it. Or if I guess in this case you have an ancient biography. The emphasis is supposed to be on the story of Jesus. So like take Luke, he's writing to this Roman ruler. The emphasis is on the story of Jesus. So I don't know if it makes sense for him to write Luke on the top of it.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Yeah, but not to avoid your answer, I think what you were asking is, since there was an embellishment afterward, doesn't that lend credibility to the original, correct?
That's not what I mean. What I'm saying is, since we can identify inauthentic aspects of Mark, wouldn't that lend credibility to the Gospel of Mark, because we know what was originally there. And if we know it wasn't,
I would say
then we know
it
wasn't.
Sorry. I would say absolutely. It does lend more credibility to the original, but it's still. If we had the same evidence for Mark, historical wise, than we do for the 7 authentic epistles of Paul, that would give it even more credibility, because the 7 of the 13 Pauline epistles, we have way more confidence in those, even as unbelievers, that Paul actually wrote those. We don't have similar confidence in the Gospels.
Okay, so what would you look for in Mark's Gospels that's present in Paul's letters?
Earlier, which I forget his name, Han Solo. I forget his
General.
Oh, yeah. Is that what you guys call him, General? Okay. What General said, that 40. I'm gonna have to delve back into that. I think that's way too early. So what I would be looking for is.
It is. No, let me just quickly clarify. So scholars will say late 60s, like 68, 80. That's technically the consensus. I have seen scholars say back in the 50s. I'm saying, and I'm probably the ultra minority, I'm saying 40s, due to certain things Jesus says in Mark, especially to a non-Jewish audience, that I think is, it just cries for a very early, reading. But at the same time, I don't actually have a problem if I'm proven wrong, and if Mark is indeed written, say, in the 60s, I actually don't have a problem with that. That the theology is still the same regardless.
Yeah.
I guess that does make quite a bit of difference to me. I know we're only quibbling over a couple of decades, but that is, as close to the actual events as possible would give it more credibility for me. And the fact that it wasn't written in Koine Greek right off the bat, which none of Jesus' contemporaries. I mean, that's really damning evidence that, that all 4 of the gospel writers never knew Jesus. And it's, I don't know what level of hearsay it is, but it sounds like a game of telephone to me.
Wait, are you saying that Jesus couldn't speak Greek?
That's a good question. I'm not a Bible scholar. Do you know something I don't? Because I don't think he did. I think most of his friends were illiterate fishermen.
Yeah, no, I can show you, you know,
Okay.
peer-reviewed journal papers from the Journal of Biblical Literature, literally titled "Was Jesus Multilingual?" And he definitely spoke Greek. Yeah.
Weren't
Okay.
like everyone in that region, like weren't they all multilingual because you had a lot of dialects that were really similar? Robert.
Yeah. So you had Aramaic and Greek. Well, a form of I hate to use the word broken, but because it sounds like it's like broken English. No, it's not like that. But they did have the Hebrew language would be specialized for those, say, in a synagogue setting. But so someone like Peter, they had very fluent Greek multilingual abilities, especially in Koine Greek. And you do have the odd like Aramaic terms here and there.
I think, okay, that's very interesting. That's enlightening to me because I have never heard that before, but I'll look into that too. I'm writing all this down. Oh, and let me quickly jump in. We're getting some pretty bad weather coming in, so if I get disrupted, that's going to be the case.
That's right.
Yeah,
can you see? Can you see the side? Can you see the side chat?
Oh, I haven't even looked at it.
No.
Okay, Jim.
If you wave, what I'll do is I'll post. Now what I'll do is I'll post 3 links in the side chat to the multilingual stuff on Jesus. Yeah.
That's interesting. But does that include? Okay, I know the New Testament speaks often of. It even comes out and says that it names certain of Jesus's disciples by name that they were illiterate fishermen. Correct? I mean, most even if I grant you that Greek was spoken in that area, would they be able? Would any of Jesus's contemporaries be able to write on a scholarly Greek level, as we find in the?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Really?
So that term was a derogative term by the scribes and Pharisees because they had a certain science on quote unquote searching the scriptures, like you see when Paul writes about it. The type of science that these people did not have, so to speak. But I think providentially, if God does exist, he chose these particular men to, that would be a special case of unbiased, like recording artists to write down what Jesus did and what he said and so on.
Well, shoot, I've got a lot to chew on here then, as far as going back and researching.
Yeah, Jim, I've got something else, and maybe you've heard this before. Okay, so I wonder if this, the whole gospel thing is an argument against God or an argument against Christianity, because really I think you could preserve both Christianity and theism in believing like that the gospels are contradictory or that they're pseudographs, because pretty much the core claims of Christianity just through historical methodology. Like, okay, even if I grant that these are major corruptions, that wouldn't overturn the fact that there's still a historical core within the Gospels. And you can learn, for example, that Jesus claimed to be the Son of Man, and that kind of thing, or that he made statements about his disciples that seemed derogatory, like calling Peter Satan. That sort of thing. So you could learn a few things about Jesus, even if you grant everything that you just said. I mean, I don't know where you stand on that. Is that something you would agree with?
We could ask ourselves this. Would that be the knockout blow for your belief in the entire religion? Maybe not, but the entire bedrock of Christianity is his dying for our sins and the resurrection accounts. I would call that's definitely more important than his birth. It's definitely more, it ranks up there with the miracles that he performed on earth. But I think his actual resurrection and what he told his disciples post resurrection would be the bedrock. If you grant me, like you just said, for the purposes of argument, if you grant that that was added later, that is kind of a knockout blow. I mean, if the only gospel we had was Mark, and we only had it end at 16:8 like it originally was, there would really be no basis for your faith.
Okay, hold on. I don't think Mark ends without, I mean...
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, in Mark 16,
Mark...
you already have in verse 6, stop being astonished, you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He has been raised. He's not here. Look at the place where they laid him.
What verse was that?
This is in verse 6.
Okay.
The only thing that people today would find kind of unsettling is verse 8, because you have this notion of them being afraid, and they're like, you know, the women are worrying what's going on. But otherwise, you know, just it's ending there. And the Ante-Nicene Fathers, they didn't have the longer ending. We're talking, by the way, not the post-Nicene. I'm talking the really early 2nd century church fathers. And
that's right.
They themselves would use that passage to defend the resurrection.
Yeah, again, no, I don't think it's...
Yeah,
and we still have the early accounts of Paul. And although he didn't meet Jesus face to face, he was met on a, you know, spiritual level. He spoke to Jesus on, you know, when Jesus was, this was post-resurrection, talked to him from a celestial realm. But still, I mean, that, I guess, is, if we can discount the fact that maybe he was delusional or had an epileptic grand mal seizure on the way to Damascus.
Yeah, but I understand that. And that's actually no different to what you see in Acts 2 and right throughout the Old Testament. Whenever a prophet is chosen by God, you have this notion of a divine council setting where he's commissioned to do something. So Jeremiah experiences it, Ezekiel experiences it, and so Paul happens to experience a similar setting. And he says and does things that are quite remarkably consistent with that Deuteronomy 32 passage I introduced you to.
Let me ask you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. You want me to briefly summarize what I meant by that?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So Paul's mission, his entire mission, like if you read, especially in the book of Romans, he says that he wants to go to Spain. And for example, atheist critics of the Bible will say something like, the book to Ephesians, that's not an authentic Pauline letter. Well, in Ephesians, you have this language of him being the apostle to the Gentiles, and that there's a certain secret that's been kept hidden for ages until his divine commissioning, and that is to be the apostle to the Gentiles. And so that overlaps very well with, in this case, with Romans and also in Acts, where his mission is to reach Spain. And in his thinking, Spain is the farthest point in regards to this disinheritance of the nations that Deuteronomy talks about. So I find it curious that of all the people that was listening to Jesus or believing in Jesus and so on, only Jesus and Paul had a unique understanding of Deuteronomy 32. Not Peter didn't have it, James didn't have it. And so I find that interesting that theology overlaps in practically the letters that are considered to be not Pauline, and yet it's included in there.
You're saying that lends to it being authentic, or like, I don't know if Ephesians is one of the 7 that we consider authentic, but
yeah, no, but that I'm giving you an example where Ephesians is considered not authentic Pauline, and I know Richard Carrier would even speak about, say, Galatians as being the celestial Jesus and so on. But curiously, Richard Carrier hasn't considered Second Temple period scholarship that showcases this peculiar theology that Jesus throughout the Gospels, like pick any Gospel, you can pick Matthew, for example, when he says and does certain things and he goes to certain geographical places, only Paul, right throughout in all the letters, including the ones that claim to be not authentic, have a unanimous scope on exactly that line of thinking. And that's what I find interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. It could have been embellished. Look at some of the contemporary fiction works from the time. They were placed in geographical settings. They knew the areas, they knew the history, and I'm sure all of Jesus himself and his disciples would be fully, I mean, everyone in that area would be at least on a orally transmitted level, they would be thoroughly versed with Deuteronomy, and they would know the old scriptures. They would, you know, I don't know. Yeah,
but then you notice you've just then admitted, if that's the case, and if this is indeed a like a forgery, that it's made up to deceive people, they would be the most brilliant minds, and not only are you talking about multilingual abilities, but they would have an exhaustive knowledge of the Old Testament.
Yeah, I believe they would.
Knowledge of, yeah, I mean, but not just that, just a lot of the geographical context that appeal to stuff that technically they would not be able to even know about. So they would not know about the theology of traveling to Spain and so on, because of certain Old Testament context that only Paul receives through divine revelation. If people at the time didn't think the way, say, Paul thinks when he writes his stuff down, and he says this is something that no one knows, and it appeared to me in divine revelation.
That no one knows and was never written down anywhere, that couldn't be researched ex post facto. Is that what you're saying?
No. So no one knows because of the fact that they're so far removed as far as the historical timescales talking about. So, for example, Isaiah back in the 700s BC, or in this case, Moses back in the 1400s BC, will be speaking about certain geographical places because they can relate to it, because they're living at the time and so on, and certain contexts with certain nations that exist and all that. Fast forward to the 1st century, that is far removed from the memory of everyone because of the Roman presence. No one's thinking about the stuff that suddenly Paul starts coming up with, that then actually works. It actually works out at the end of the day. Like what Paul writes to encourage the church to do certain things, then coincidentally causes the church to do exactly that and then explode and survive, which is really unusual if this is just a deceptive message.
I would have to go line by line, each individual point of information, and look and see what could and could not have been researched, and what could and could not have been known by someone of that era. And what you're kind of doing is you're almost discounting the power of verbal transmission. If you do that, you're kind of hurting, the early church father case with, of course, we talked about the end of Mark. We haven't talked about all the other epigraphical, in the New Testament. If this was added later through verbal transmission, we're discounting the strength of that verbal transmission, like the woman taken in adultery, the concept of the Trinity. This was all added by early church fathers centuries after the Septuagint.
Let's talk about the Trinity. What do you mean?
Oh, I think Trinity is only mentioned once in the New Testament. Is that correct? And no.
Okay. So
okay.
Okay, so with the doctrine of the Trinity, you have 3 basic premises. First, there's only one God. Second, there are 3 distinct persons. And third, those persons are not. There's one God who's eternally present in 3 persons. That's the whole doctrine of the Trinity. And you can find each of those steps in some place in the New Testament. The third one was the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You can find each of those steps in the New Testament. Like, for example, if you go to Hebrews chapter 1, you see the Father referring to the Son, and he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. And then he goes on to attribute a creation psalm to the Son, to Jesus himself. And this creation psalm was traditionally always ascribed to Yahweh, Like if you look at the psalm that he's citing in the Old Testament, you'll see that originally it said the name Yahweh, which of course is God himself. So in that sense, that would just be one verse that would establish one aspect of the Trinity. Another would be John 1:18, where you see nobody has seen God at any time, but the only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. So there you see Jesus and the Father both being God and both being distinct from one another. So, okay, throughout the New Testament, you have several passages that give you one aspect of the Trinity, and systematic theology kind of puts them together in a cohesive unity known as the doctrine of the Trinity. So the Trinity isn't based on the single proof text in 1 John 5:7. If that was what we had, I would think that would be a terrible case for the Trinity, because I wouldn't even be sure how strong that verse would be.
Yeah, can I just, I know, Jim, you want to respond, but can I also very briefly say, have you heard of the two powers in heaven idea in early Judaism?
I believe I have. Give me a rundown.
Okay,
so
let's do that, Robert, because I want him to respond.
Oh, okay. All right, go ahead.
Just real quick. Okay, Hebrews 1, when we're talking about Yahweh, I'm not going to, I'll pull up the verse later, but does it specifically indicate that God and the Son are one? I'm just asking.
Are one?
Yes.
Okay, so...
Or one in the Godhead of the Trinity, or anything close to it? Does it allude to it?
I'm going to bring it up, and I'm just going to...
Yeah, shoot. I just need to do the same thing.
Okay. It says in verse 8, and this is the Father talking, because you can go up and see that it's the Father talking. Verse 8, but of the Son he says, and he's quoting a psalm now, your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is in his kingdom. Now, that's the Father saying, calling the Son God. And I think this is actually more significant. And most people focus on verse 8, but I think the focus should be more on verses 10 to 12. So if you scroll down, it's still the Father talking to the Son. You, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will perish, but you remain, and you will become old like a garment, and the mantle you will roll them up like a garment. They will become changed, but you are the same, and your years will never come to an end. Now, this is the Father talking about the Son in the book of Hebrews. So I think so. I think we do see both the Father and the Son are uniquely divine.
Now, when they say the Son, we can be completely sure that we're talking about Jesus. I'm going to have to go back and research that, because there are some verses that, like in Micah and Isaiah, that attribute, some of these prophetical things, some of these older, Old Testament prophecies that, foreshadow Jesus. That we look back and, that was King Nebuchadnezzar II, or we got to look at the history of this.
I get what you're saying, and I would agree with that interpretation of those passages because of the context. But in the same way, the entire book of Hebrews is about the undoing of the old sacrificial system because of the sacrifice of the cross, and it's about the preeminence of the Son. So look, if you look at kind of the prologue of Hebrews, starting in verse 1, God, after he spoke long ago in the fathers, in the prophets, in many portions and in many ways, in these last days he has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom he made the world. So this wouldn't be referring to Israel or anything like that. And he goes on to say, and he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. And finally, when he made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become as much better than the angels, as he inherited a more excellent name than they. So I think this is clearly, I don't know that there would be any debate at all among scholars. Maybe Robert can correct that about whether that is Jesus Christ, because Robert.
The clearest term here would be in verse 3 in the Greek, apogasma. So my translation says reflection of God's glory. Richard's one says, I think, radiance.
Yeah.
Or I think the ESV has the imprint of God's glory, or the exact imprint, I think it says. Basically, apogasma. Guess how many times it appears in the New Testament And guess how many times it appears in the BC period in the Pseudepigrapha? Like maybe Jim, or like throw out a random number.
I have no idea. I know. I wouldn't even hazard to guess.
That one word. Guess how many times it appears? It appears literally only one time in the entire New Testament. So this is unique, right? This is a rare, unique word, and it appears one time in the Wisdom of Solomon, which is a pseudepigraphical text in the BC period. Speaking of wisdom of God, speaking of what I was just about to talk to you about, and that is this notion of the two powers in heaven, where early Jewish theologians and believers, even before Jesus came on the scene, believed in a form of binitarianism. So not Trinitarianism, but a two-ness. And so they had so the first power would be like this invisible, his glory can't be seen sort of thing. But so that's why he needs this second power to be his mediator, so to speak. And in fact, Bart Ehrman, in his book God, he actually summarizes this particular point in saying, look, all these arguments that you see ranging from, say, the Zeitgeist critics all the way down to the Muslims who say this concept of the Trinity that was invented. No, you have terms like apogasma used of a second person in the Godhead that makes sense only if Yahweh is spoken about, and yet somehow this is the second person. And yeah, Jesus applies some of the terms to himself. For example, when he's before the High Council, and in this case, if you go to Mark, so the Gospel of Mark, and so scholars consider Mark to be the earliest account. So here we have the earliest account, and when the high priest says, "Are you the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus says, "I am," and you'll see the Son of Man seated at the right hand, or power. Notice he uses the term power there. He says right hand. He's saying, calling himself the Son of Man. You'll see him seated at the right hand. So he's the second power, and coming with clouds, meaning he will be the cloud rider. And if you go back to the Old Testament, Yahweh is always designated as a cloud rider. It's a title to mean only Yahweh can do that. In fact, cloud means angel, so he's the angel rider. And so, yeah.
Let me just jump in real quick. Yeah, you cited that in Mark. I would think that sounds a little bit more like a shared power than two figures in the same person. Would you not agree with that? A lot of these what you're quoting are, shared powers, and not necessarily one in the same Godhead.
No. So that's our modern way of when we apply certain terms and thinking. You have to think like a first century Jew. So first century Jew. So Jesus is quoting Psalm 110, and he's quoting Daniel 7. So Psalm 110 is this Melchizedek psalm of a being, who knows who this being is, but so because Melchizedek is mentioned in that psalm, but basically if you go along with the theology, you have this Yahweh figure seated at the right hand of Yahweh, and it's kind of like, what's going on here? And he's designated Melchizedek, and Jesus refers to the psalm in Mark 12 and Matthew 22 when he asks the Pharisees a question. If David, and by the way, it's a Davidic psalm, so Jesus is like, if David calls him Lord, then how can this Yahweh guy, who's called Kurios, or Lord, how can he be his son? How can David's offspring in the future be Yahweh himself? And in Matthew specifically, it says that they couldn't answer that question because it makes no sense. How can a future son of David be God himself? Because of that Psalm 110. And so that's the context behind what Richard was getting at as well.
That's interesting. I mean, if we accept that Jesus was divine, that would be all we need. It seems troublesome for me to put him and Yahweh as one in the same. God in the Old Testament spoke of himself as one of many, as a not a Trinitarian type doctrine, but when he spoke of let us create this and let us do
Right.
you know, he spoke. I think the word is Elohim in the Hebrew, meaning like a plurality of gods.
Yeah. No, I would. Yeah, I actually.
Hold on. Let's let Jim finish.
No,
Okay.
I was done.
Oh, okay.
No, okay. So before I get to that Elohim one, with the let us make, there is a term they did use. It's called hypostasis. So if you want to research what a first century Jew, specifically in the Greek language, for example, someone like Philo, they would actually designate terms like hypostasis. So that means you have two distinct persons, and yet they are the same ontologically.
Is that in the Bible?
So I would recommend you.
Or an equivalency of hypostasis? What's the word in the Bible?
Actually, yes, it's in Hebrews 1, the very passage Richard quoted from. Jesus is the hypostasis.
What's the verse?
It's in the Greek.
That is going to require much homework, but thank you for that. That's actually a new perspective.
What is
Let me just open the Greek
verse?
and I'll get the reference. Yeah. And the other one about let us make. I know Christians. I don't know how Richard will respond to that. I know Christians will say Genesis 1 is speaking about the Trinity. I think it's a divine council setting. I think God is speaking to his council saying, let us make. But then I do know of legitimate responses by scholars like Gleason Archer who do make a legitimate case that, okay, I understand that, but let's just for the sake of argument say that the us there is speaking of the Trinity. Because if he's speaking to a divine council, then you're talking about a plural majesty. And scholars like Gleason Archer make a legitimate point that the plural majesty idea did not exist any time in the BC period. So only in the 2nd century AD onwards do you have this idea of plural majesty. So therefore, when God says, let us make, in a text that's well in the BC period, you're talking, if you take the JDB hypothesis and you're speaking, say, 600 BC, then the us there makes no sense because they didn't have that concept. So therefore, in this case, you're talking about like a plurality in the Godhead talking. But otherwise, putting that technicality aside, I still hold to a ancient Near Eastern cosmology of God talking to his council and saying, yeah, we're going to do this. Let's, make humans. And
Hey, Jim, I know you're not a theologian, so I don't want you to feel like we're just hitting you with all this.
No, this is good stuff, man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I got a lot of homework to do now.
Yeah, and one other one, I know I brought it up earlier. I don't know if you wrote that down, but a good one to look at regarding the Trinity would be John 1:18, and pretty much
I got that.
The entire prologue of John, like John 1:1 to 1:18. Pretty much all of that is related.
And that's where I can find hyperstasis as a concept of maybe not necessarily a Trinity, but a binarism. Yeah.
I think in John 1:1 through 18, you'll definitely find at least binitary.
All right.
Yeah. So,
okay.
So Richard, I found where it appears. It's in Hebrews 1:3.
Yeah, that's what.
So you have who being the radiance of the apogasma of the splendor and reproduction of the. Now I don't know what it says for you, but it's the substance of him. So the substance there is hypostasis.
If all this is true, which after my research, I'll see if that was actually baked into the scriptures. But back to the original point, my only whether or not it's true or whether or not at the time they believed it to be true. Of course, as an unbeliever, I don't believe in a Trinity. But if they did, I was just naming. I think it was 1 John 5:7 as just another example of pseudepigraphical. Insertion.
I mean, I think I would agree with that. Like, I think they were Trinitarians, and they wrote what if they're not Trinitarians, then why are you writing 1 John 5:7, right?
We can be sure that one was late and fake. But you made some good points about the Trinity being a concept even prior to that. And of course, just going back to the Old Testament, when us as non-believers, and I'm sure a lot of theists as well, when they see Elohim, they're not concluding any type of Trinitarian doctrine. I think.
No, I agree with that as well.
I think it was, when Yahweh, prior to coming into his own, he was part of a larger pantheon of gods. This we can be sure of. In the Canaanite tradition, El was the main god, and Yahweh was just one of many underneath him as a war god. He was married to Asherah, another goddess, and that's kind of the evolution of Yahweh when the Hebrews evolved from the Canaanites, because all Hebrews were once Canaanites in and of themselves. If we go back far enough.
Yeah, no, that's another good point. So yeah, Elohim cannot. Well, I'm trying not to distance too many Christians out of that, but let's just put it this way: Elohim. In fact, Psalm 82 verse 1. I mean, look at the Hebrew structure of Psalm 82 verse 1. You have Elohim appearing twice. So you have Elohim in the first part of the psalm, and it's translated singularly God. God stands in the council. So if Elohim means a trinity or a plurality, now you're falling into grammatical problems. So here's another way of looking at Elohim. Elohim, according to ancient Near Eastern thinking and scholarship, is about place of residence. It's actually not speaking about like how many people there are in a trinity or something like that. It's literally it's a word that's used. For example, if we were to say I saw a ghost or I saw a spirit, you're talking about an entity on the other side, and that's what the word's used. So it's basically saying this entity, in this case we know who he is, it's Yahweh, is standing in the council judging other entities, in this case other gods. And but what makes this particular Elohim unique, in this case Yahweh, is because he's the creator of everything. No other god or no other Elohim is comparable to him.
General, I don't know if you're. I don't speak Hebrew, but I under the impression that Elohim itself, that word is a plural word. No,
it is. Yes, it has a plural ending. Yes. But then this is where semantics and context come in, because I always appeal to that being the key ingredient in understanding how the word is used. So, for example, Samuel, when he's killed, well, actually when he dies, and then when the Witch of Endor conjures him up for Saul, she says, "I see an Elohim coming out of the ground." Now, you're not going to imply that it's multiple gods because of the plural ending, or you're not going to imply it's a trinity. It's just this singular entity, Samuel, that's disembodied, that's coming out of the ground, and so it's just the way the word's used. That's the best way.
What verse was that?
1 Samuel 28, if I'm not mistaken, where the Witch of Endor episode takes place.
Got it. No, I got so much homework. Jeez, guys. Okay.
I'd like to get some interaction about this, the evolution of Yahweh thing that you brought up. Maybe you want to talk about that.
Yeah. That's actually okay. When the Ugaritic material was dug up in the late 1800s, when they're starting to find all the cuneiform texts, like the Rosh Hashanah parallel texts and so on, they started to notice, for example, like you said, El and Baal. In fact, okay, a quick tangent. So when I said Jesus is the cloud rider or Yahweh is a cloud rider, well, guess who was the cloud rider in the Ugaritic material? It was Baal. Baal is the chariot rider of the clouds. And then I suppose it was because of the fact that Christians were starting to see this firsthand. No one knew about this stuff for easily maybe 1,000 years, maybe 1,500 years. It was only in the last 300 years that or even 200 years we've been able to digest this stuff and then go back to the BC period and then properly understand what's going on. So theories were rising about this consort Asherah and how Yahweh is related to her, and maybe Yahweh is like a subordinate being to El, and so on. And as of the latest research goes, and so Richard mentioned the ancient Near Eastern scholar Michael Heiser. He's actually specialized in this in his dissertation, and he's written papers from 2008 onwards, showcasing that the so-called evolution of Yahweh from the prior gods actually makes no sense. He's always designated as uniquely separate, and that the modeling of a divine council, like El and his council, in this case Baal being his coordinate and so on, actually is invented after Yahweh worship. So it's a borrowing from an Israelite theology in regards to the Ugaritic material. You won't find, for example, Sumerian theology, where you have Enki, Enel, and all those other gods. They don't match what you were talking about, and that is this Asherah stuff, because that stuff comes post-Moses. And so therefore, Moses and prior, you have an authentic Yahweh type theology that even before that, there was no equivalent. So if Israel borrowed from something prior, then we should be able to see it. But what we do see is what comes after is definitely a borrowing from Israelite theology. The same concepts and so on. Yeah.
I would like, if you could quote, if you could tell me that that book again. I think that flies in the face of ancient Canaanite history. We can agree that they were polytheists and that El was the head of the pantheon at the very least, right?
No, I'm not. No. A lot of ancient Near Eastern scholars agree with what I'm saying. So yes, there's a sense of polytheism, but it's known as monolatry, meaning they had singular worship to a particular deity without denying the existence of other gods. And what Heiser has done, and even people like John Walton and even the late scholar Gleason Archer, so this type of worship actually is later than Moses. So it's all this material that you're talking about is it's kind of like when the Gnostic Christians come after Christianity. And so then they twist and borrow certain things to make a whole new, religion. That's what we see in regards to what was originally Yahweh worship, and now it's this other stuff. So I've seen, when you're talking about, say, like the late 1800s, like 1890 or something, when commentaries were written on, say, Deuteronomy, right? And I just mentioned to you Deuteronomy 32. So in Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, you have the phrase, the Most High gave nations their inheritance. The phrase Most High is El Elyon. And so those early scholars were like, oh, look, see, El Elyon, that's the El God. And notice it says Yahweh has taken his inheritance. So notice Yahweh is under El Elyon. And yet only now, because we've taken more care in surveying all the literature, that El Elyon is Yahweh. There is no differentiation between the two. They're the one and the same. And so it's been completely debunked, is what I'm saying. That type of argument.
Completely debunked. Okay, what's the name of this book?
Well, if you can see the side chat, I don't know if you can see the links I've included.
See, I'm not very astute on this format, so.
Hey, Jim,
click on the.
Sorry.
About the sources, I'll send them all to you.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. That is new information to me. That's the first heard. And you said it's been completely debunked. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna be. Just pardon my skepticism on that one, but yeah, I'm gonna look into it. That the Canaanite pantheon was a later insertion after the Mosaic.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. We got a new person, right?
Yep. Thaddeus, how's it going? Thaddeus is an atheist. I thought it'd be nice to give you a partner.
I'm not an atheist.
Oh, right. You're a misotheist, meaning you hate theism. But
there's a good place to start right there. Wow.
Don't misrepresent me, bro.
is misotheist and atheist mutually exclusive terms, or can you be one or both?
I think you can be both, but I mean, there's no point using that term unless you might as well call yourself a militant atheist at that point. I don't know. Whatever you want to use. I'm not your mother.
That is a theist, but he hates it.
So Richard, I just posted the link titled, the paper's titled, "Does Divine Plurality in the Hebrew Bible Demonstrate an Evolution from Polytheism to Monotheism?"
Okay. Oh, yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
I'd like to read that. Okay, yeah, I'll definitely send you that one, Jim.
God, I've got so much reading to do. Thanks, guys.
Oh,
I got
okay,
two
well,
interviews to do tomorrow. I'm booked as it is, and now you put more
cancel them.
on me.
Who are the interviews with? Is
You
it
have
like,
homework. You're back in school.
is
Yes.
it like on your show, or is it a real life thing?
They're going to be pre-recorded, but they'll be for the show. Up tomorrow, I'm doing show notes with a doctor of divinity with the Watchman Fellowship. We're going to talk about Ouija boards in the occult. And then I'm talking to a militant atheist from a local chapter here. Him and his wife, who's an evangelical Christian, been married like 40 years. I'm going to talk about how you get along with each other.
Oh, that's a topic. I might tune into that because I have thought about that. I've heard pretty hardcore atheists that I've met online say that they're married to a Christian, and I'm like, okay, how does that even work? Like, how do you function in your marriage
Exactly.
when your wife is going
Right.
to church and you're online talking about like how much you hate God or something? I guess I'm thinking of Thaddeus for that one.
Wow.
So what's up, Thaddeus? Explain misotheism.
You explained it pretty well. I don't know what else you want me to do.
It's
Maybe go
pretty
back to the
self-explanatory
etymology
then.
of it.
Well,
Yeah.
MIS means a hatred of, like misanthrope means you hate people, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I get it.
Or, yeah. So I don't know. What else is there to explain?
Well, is there animosity? Do you like the general and Richard? Does it extend to an ad hominem? Do you hate them personally or just their ideas?
I don't hate them personally. I get along with them fine as friends, acquaintances, people on the internet. I don't hate them. Just their ideas. I mean, Richard I don't know that well, but I don't hate him. In general, I know a little bit better than Richard, so more of a relationship there, but I don't hate him.
Once you
Yeah, we have pixie love. That's what's happening.
once you get to know General really well, you'll come to hate him.
I'll keep that in mind.
I highly doubt it. I mean, if nothing else, then just his incredible stores of knowledge that we can,
Yeah, General.
If nothing else, you got to respect that.
Yeah,
Oh
General.
yeah, exactly.
We
Way
all
over my head.
Okay, so that's one reason that we all hate General. That he's smarter than all of us.
Yeah, I'm technically asleep right now, so.
Okay, Jim.
To be honest, this is actually good for my body clock. I need this because I need to reset my body clock so bad.
Okay, Jim. So you are not just a non-Christian. You're an atheist. You don't believe in God. Period. Right?
I don't believe you're sitting in that chair, Richard.
Okay.
That brown suede chair. I don't believe you're sitting in it.
Okay. Maybe you can tell me more about that.
Here we go. Ready? My
Wait,
wife
do you think
she's heard this one so many times. Belief is a it's a believer's word. It's not ours. It's your word. It implies faith, and faith. Hebrews 1:11. The substance of things not seen. I know faith can be 11:1. Is it? Yeah, I don't know.
11:3.
11:3. Okay, so belief and faith I consider synonyms. That's arguable, but if that's the case, then to believe in something is to know it for a fact without even a shred of evidence. And I've had Christians tell me, well, that's not what faith is. Faith is, and I've always on my YouTube shows, I always ask theists right off the bat, if I give you 4 words, tell me which one faith is most closely related to: knowing, hoping, guessing, or trusting. Now, from my experience, most Christians will put knowing without any evidence. Now, I've had some that say trusting is what faith really means. It's most closely related to trust in something based on the evidence that we can get. So, but the way I read the scriptures is that faith, you wouldn't need the word faith. You could just call it trust. What makes faith different? It's to believe you're sitting in that chair is to know you are without any evidence. Now, I could go, where are you, in Virginia? I could take you and that chair to the nearest physics lab, and I could measure your mass, your density, and I could have some solid evidence for you sitting in that chair. But to put it on faith, to put it on belief, is illogical.
Okay, yeah, let me respond to that. I had a link right here. Okay, so I'm looking at it's called The Analysis of Knowledge on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, so plato.stanford.com. And on this, it goes with pretty much the classical definition of what knowledge is, which is justified true belief. So it's a tripartite analysis of knowledge. Three parts: justified, has to be justified, has to be true, and you have to believe it. Otherwise, you don't know it. So I don't know that I would agree with that to believe something means you don't have any evidence for it. I think to know something presupposes that you believe it, doesn't it?
Why do you say belief instead of knowing then? Why are there two separate words?
Because they're
I never say I believe you're sitting in that chair. If you wanted me to make a statement on you in that chair right now, I would say I accept that you are sitting in that chair. Unless I went to Virginia and put my hands on you, took you to a lab and measured your density. Yeah, I can tentatively, the best I can do is tentatively accept that you're sitting in that chair right now.
But that presupposes that you believe it, right?
You're using, I think we're talking past each other. I think you're using belief in a different way than I do. Now I can come down and say, I can use belief any way you want. We can, if we agree on a term, I can, I can say this is my e-cigarette, or, I mean, we can agree on terms.
Yeah, I guess I think you're right. I didn't mean belief in the sense that you believe it without evidence. I meant belief in the sense that you give assent to it, and that could be based on evidence or not. So yeah. that would be why it's different from knowledge, because belief is something you can give assent to, and it can come with evidence or not. But if you have knowledge, then you have belief, at least in the sense that I'm using it.
If we can agree that belief in the terms that I'm going to keep using it from now on is just a tentative acceptance of something, then yeah, we can just use belief and we can keep going.
Hey, Steve McRae, how's it going?
Hey, I've got so much to add here. How many hours you guys got?
Steve, I'm upset.
I know Atheist Edge said he has other things to do, but I got
no, that's tomorrow. You got me all night.
By the way, hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
If I knew
okay,
you were
a few things.
I would have come in as one of my stock accounts.
No worries. Hey, give MP the link, by the way. First things first, Thaddeus, mesotheist is a form of theism. You cannot be an atheist and be a mesotheist, because mesotheists hate God, not people that worship God. They hate the concept of a deity. Now, you can be a mesotheist and an anti-theist, which is somebody who hates the concept of God and the concept of religion, but you cannot be a mesotheist and be an atheist. The other thing is the idea of belief. I don't know why atheists are so worried about the word belief. Belief is actually.
Don't be mean to Jim.
I'm not mean to anybody except to you. I was a little mean to you earlier today.
Yeah, I was mean back, but I deleted my comment.
Okay, good. I love you. So, there's a whole form of logic called dysastic logic. People, to have knowledge, we have to have a belief. And yes, there is justified true belief. I don't follow that. I follow RTB, right, which is a form of reliabilism, rational true, or reliable true belief. It's a lot more effective, and it's not affected by the giddy air problems. So there's different ways we can determine what we consider to be knowledge. But all forms of knowledge require belief. If you don't believe something, you don't know it. There's a problem of equivocation if you start saying, okay, well, yes, I believe on faith this, and that's what religious people do. That's what theists do. But there's nothing wrong with the word belief itself. I believe you're sitting there because I have confirmation, empirical evidence that I can see that you're sitting there. I can actually say epistemically, I have certainty. I can see that you're sitting there. I know that you do. It's not a Cartesian form of certainty. It's a confidence level that's extremely high, and there's a gradient that you could put a belief on. That's all, from the scale of theism to agnosticism to atheism. There's a gradient there, right? And In the middle there is more belief, and as you go to the peripheral edges, you have knowledge. So I know that a lot of atheists, they call themselves epistivist based upon bionic dance word that she created, and I know Aaron loves that, Aaron Ra. But the word really is silly. We all have beliefs, and there's nothing wrong with that. And as skeptics and agnostics and atheists, we need to take that word back and not be afraid to use it. Just like we shouldn't use the word, be afraid to use the word design. I know a lot of atheists, oh, we're not designed. Yes, we're designed. But we're teleonomically, not teleologically designed. We're designed by nature, right? So I'm saying to the atheist edge, don't be afraid to use these terms. Take them back from the theist. You know, take them back from Richard and General. I love to death. General's one of my all-time favorite people in the world. But we shouldn't be afraid of using these terms just because theists use them. There you go. That's my rant. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Swallow.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, I got 3 things for Steve.
Go for it.
So misotheist, because you said 2 different things. I want to make sure which one do you actually agree with, because they can't both be right. Misotheists hate God, which is what you originally said, or misotheists hate the concept of God, which you said like 3 sentences later.
Misotheists actually hate God himself.
3 sentences later, you said
the concept of God.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll take that back. It's really actually the God himself. Okay, atheists accept the concept of God exists, right? You would accept the concept of God exists, but you don't believe God exists, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so conceptually,
Right,
sure, we have these concepts. An anti-theist, I thought I said anti-theist is against the concept of God or against religion. If I didn't, let me correct that. An anti-theist would be against the concept of God or against religion. A mesotheist is against God himself. So you have to believe that God exists in order to not like him. That's what Thaddeus' position has been before. I don't know if he's changed it.
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's the closest label. I mean, I don't like giving myself any label, but if you're going to be on this community, you got to be able to call yourself something. So.
It's just easier for dialectics.
We don't call ourselves a Loch Ness Monsterists because there's not a huge percentage of the population out there that, believe in the Loch Ness Monster, and through him you can be saved. And, so we got to call ourselves something in response to, the majority.
Well, the majority,
like no label. That's awesome.
Yeah, this is a huge discussion in the Great Debate community. It's not 98% to 2%, but when you have theism, the negation of theism is non-theism, right? P or not P. So it's theism or not theism. Atheism is a subsection of or subset of non-theism.
Yes.
So when you call yourself something, it doesn't make sense to call yourself a non-theist. I mean, I'm a non-theist, but I'm not an atheist. So it doesn't really tell you anything by saying, I'm a non-theist. It's too big of a umbrella to really have any real substance of what you're trying to get across as far as your beliefs.
Can you not say non-religious?
No, because it's two different things. Religion and belief in God are completely different things. You could be a Christian and not be religious, believe it or not.
Okay.
There are people that don't like formal religion. I mean,
I just prefer using
nuanced thing
because it's less offensive than misotheist.
It all depends on what you mean by the word religious. Like the word cult. Cult literally means formal, venerable worship. Under that definition, all religions are cult.
I agree.
Yeah. So it really depends what you mean by religion. When people say I'm against religion, they're meaning they're against organized religion. And some Christians are against organized religion.
Okay, so we kind of went off on a tangent there. I want to get back to the question I asked Jim, and maybe I'll phrase it in such a way that avoids the word belief. Jim, so you are not just a non-Christian, you are an atheist, meaning that you don't give assent to belief in, you don't give assent to God. Maybe you can tell us more about that. Like, why not? Why don't you believe in like a deist conception of God or some other religion?
So the prefix "a" in, I believe it's Greek or Latin, I don't know. It means free from or without.
Okay.
So I'm just without a religion. I'm without God. I'm free of religion. I've never believed. In my book, I describe it in depth, but I'm what James Walker of the Watchman Fellowship, he likes to label me a cradle atheist. I've never been a believer. I've always questioned it. So I'm a kind of a minority even in the atheist community. Most of them are converts or deconverts, you know, what have you. But and I forgot your original question. Oh, why do I not believe in God? Right?
Well, assent. You don't like the word belief.
Yeah. Well, why not? Why do I not accept God, Yahweh, as real?
Oh, no, not just
yeah.
Yahweh. Not just Yahweh. I'm not just talking about that. I'm talking about
or any gods.
Yeah.
It doesn't line up with logic. What would it take if God were in existence? He would know what it would take, and he would, if he wanted me to believe in him, he would imbue me with the ability to believe in him. Mm-hmm. And he hasn't yet. So either A, he wants atheists to exist, and or he wants to torture me eternally, because it's impossible. Belief is not something you can choose. You come to it. It's a realization, not a choice. You couldn't right now force yourself to be an atheist. You couldn't just switch and just say, oh, I don't believe in God anymore. You just can't do that. It's a realization. It comes to you. You don't come to it. And so far it hasn't come to me.
You know, and it gets into the whole thing of God, Richard, if God is an all-powerful, omnipresent, omniscient, all the omnis, the only way he could bestow a knowledge to you, to his sure existence, is to make you equal to him in knowledge. And that would make you a God equal to him.
Wait, what?
Yeah, well, think about this. You have an
I agree with Steve though. No, that's true.
Yeah, you have an epistemic limit, right? For example, like solipsism. You are assuming that we exist. You have to make that basal assumption because you have an epistemic limit. But God and Atheist Edge, what's your first name, John?
Jim.
Jim's absolutely right.
Wait, are you talking about certainty, right? Like absolute.
Right. If God is all knowing, he's going to know what it takes to give you knowledge in a way that you're going to be convinced that he exists. But the only way you could have knowledge where you are certain, Cartesian certainty that exists, is to have equal knowledge unto himself.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I don't have much of a
problem with that. And that is impossible because you're a finite creature, assuming God exists. So it's an argument against people saying that they have ultimate knowledge of God or certain knowledge of God. You cannot. It's logically not there.
This is where I sort of disagree with that. No, I agree. I
ever disagree with me, General? No, I'm kidding. I love it. He's like, yeah, I agree with Steve. Wait, no, I don't.
No, I agree and disagree. So, I mean, Steve, this is where the incarnation comes in. I mean, the incarnation of Christ is the only way we can meet midway. So, I mean, I agree with you that because God himself
even if you saw Christ.
No. So God himself, 2,000 years ago, the only way we even know he exists, like if you think about it, like let's for the sake of argument believe or accept that what's written in the Gospels is true. It's the one time in human history where God himself goes, yeah, I know about that epistemic limit, that, you know, me being eternal, you can't know me. You can't know that I exist. So what he does is he enters into that finite realm and showcases himself to exist. That
doesn't overcome your epistemic limit. Thomas doubted.
Not really, because
so you're saying that if somebody sees Jesus, they automatically have knowledge that God can exist or that God exists. I don't see that at all.
Once he saw the risen Lord and said and touched Jesus, he said, "My Lord and my God." Like that epistemic limit was.
That's
satisfied.
Belief. Well, no, his threshold for believing was met. That's not an epistemic certainty.
So wait,
Jim, do you see?
Are you suggesting that the epistemic certainty is in relation to the ontological nature of it? So, like, if God is eternal, you need eternal.
Yes,
certainty
for its ontological nature or the existential nature of God. You have to have infinite knowledge on par with him because of your limitation.
But what's wrong if the eternal God descends down and gives a shorter or lessens the epistemic limit down to a certain upper limit, and that'll be good enough, for that person to.
Oh, go ahead, Jim. Go ahead, Jim.
It's funny you brought up Thomas, because that's what I was thinking. If I were in his similar shoes and I went through everything he went through and I stuck my fingers in his wounds and I saw his resurrected body, that would probably be enough for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way,
well, there you go.
Me too. Right. Let me clarify. It would be probably enough for me as well. But I'm talking about a certainty, right?
Yeah.
Again, there's
Steve,
a gradient scale on your beliefs and knowledge.
And Steve, and so that epistemic certainty then is what Revelation 21 talks about, because like you and I spoke about before, remember I told you we won't be corrupt again in the new creation because of theosis, because we will be joined with the Trinity, and therefore any form of finite knowledge is just removed away.
But that's after death.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right, but we're finite now. We have a temporal existence.
But that's my point. For now, there's enough. it's reached.
It's
the upper
enough
limit
for
now.
belief. I'm saying that nobody in corporeal form could ever have certainty knowledge of God's existence because of that epistemic limit.
That will only happen after
being.
death.
That's a well formulated argument.
But I'm saying it'll only happen after death.
Okay, well, that's hypothetically possible. I'm not saying that I believe that, but at least you understand what I'm saying, General.
Can I just?
I do. Yeah.
Of course.
As far as certainty is kind of a bugaboo for me. Everything is on a gradient, just like the one. I forget if it was the general that said it, but even Alexander the Great, Abraham Lincoln, everything's graded on a scale. We can never be 100% certain that really the fact that I'm even here right now, if I just want to throw that in your lap, is there still just an infinitesimal chance that we are all just a hyper intelligent 14-year-old's computer in his basement? I mean, certainty is always graded on a scale.
Sure, but that doesn't preclude us from allowing the use of the word knowledge. Like I say, I know you're sitting there. Okay, that doesn't mean absolute Cartesian certainty. Again, it just means within our understanding of reality, you're there. I know that you're sitting on the couch or futon or whatever, and you're talking to a mic. I can see that. There's nothing wrong with calling that knowledge. At that point, it's more than just belief. If we agree that that is a non-100% certainty, yes. Within the framework of reality, it is 100%. Outside of that framework, that's a whole different ballgame.
I agree with that.
I make the basal assumption that the universe is real. I'm a foundationalist. So I start off with the position axiomatically that universe exists. Okay. You don't have to. Most people do, but I'm down with that. I find it easier. And with that framework, starting with that axiom, I can make knowledge claims. Now, outside of that, yeah, you're right. Then I can't have that certainty. Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. Okay. I like you. Who's this guy again, Richard? Where do you find him?
I get that a lot, man.
The Atheist Edge. I actually found him watching. I was watching an interview between one of his co-hosts and Aaron Raw. So I messaged them and I was like, "Come on."
You want to get Aaron in here?
He lives about 40 miles from me, and he's down for anything. So guess what? It's a possibility.
Yeah, you definitely.
Yeah, no, Aaron. I had a debate with a guy named True Empiricism, and Aaron really helped me out by sending me some stuff, and he promoted. I do the hangouts for debates for the Ken Hovind debates.
Steve,
and he really promoted that on his Facebook, so I'm really appreciative to Aaron. He's been really, really good to us.
Did you lose that one as badly as you lost to Nephilim Free? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I have never lost a debate. That's a fact.
No one's ever lost to Nephilim Free also.
Yeah, that's even true. Yes, seriously. No, General, you moderated one of my debates. Did I lose that debate, or did I spank ass up and down, kick butt?
You spanked so much that I had to clarify things for you, and then I got in trouble for that.
Yeah, the guy did not understand a word I was saying, and it got so bad, Jim. I'm not lying. He literally left during the Q&A because he was getting spanked so hard he didn't want to continue.
Really?
General?
Oh my goodness.
General, you were the moderator.
Yes, that's what's happened. It's on my channel.
Yeah, and then it was funny that Nicola actually wrote to me. He found 15 different reasons why on a graded professional debate he would have lost. He made that many faux pas.
Wow.
So yeah, I obliterated him.
Who is this again? I'd like to watch that.
That was True Empiricism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he wanted he waited a year to debate me, and he screwed the pooch on that one royally.
All right, so Richard, maybe go back to what you were wanting to talk about. I don't know what you had.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand his reasons for being a non-theist or for not being.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the short answer is no. No good evidence has been provided yet, and I tentatively reject the idea of God or gods in the absence of evidence.
Yeah.
There's lots of good evidence. It's just it's not scientific, which kind of sucks.
And it's not satisfactory for me personally.
Yeah, and that's nothing wrong with that. That's a fine position. I mean, if somebody says, "Look, I'm going to provisionally take the position of God does not exist. I believe God does not exist," and they do so under the condition that there has not been supportive evidence, there's nothing wrong with that, Richard.
Now, this is a hyperbolic example, but if, say, video technology were to have been a thing back then, and we had good video of, I don't know, say every graveyard in Jerusalem opening up and the zombies walking around post-resurrection, that would be something that would, you know.
So
I'm not saying it's aliens.
Would the evidence have to be
that text is not speaking about.
I know where you're going, but Jim, would it have to be that powerful of evidence to convince you?
That's why I said it's hyperbolic. It would probably take way less than that. But I was just, you know, that's just one example. But that's a really troublesome verse. The eclipse, the tearing of the giant shroud in the temple, the earthquakes, everything, and no contemporary secular historian from that time frame in that area even talked about it.
How about Josephus?
Richard, let me ask you this, Richard. Why is it that in the Bible God did all these miraculous things, right? And people supposedly, like saw miracles. We are just the same people back as they were back then. How come God doesn't do those things now? How come the divine hiddenness is such that He doesn't do these things?
Yeah, maybe He does. Different times where He heals people and stuff and miracles and things.
I've never seen anybody healed.
I know you haven't, and of course I haven't either. But there's other people that would be able to tell you, like, shoot, if it wasn't for some sort of divine intervention, I would not be healed right now.
But you'd also have people tell you they've been abducted by aliens, though. So
I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens.
Yeah. Okay. Here's my answer. I think I'm just going to mute everyone while I'm talking from now on. So the Bible isn't like it's not like starting 2,000 years ago, God was interacting heavily throughout the entire course of human history, and then He just stopped at the resurrection of Christ. I think the narratives in the Bible are scattered like throughout history. So what we see in the Bible wouldn't be significant, like the state of people's lives wouldn't be significantly different than it is today. In fact, if you look at, like, say the prophets, like read through a few of the minor prophets, you're not going to see a whole lot of miracles. Like most of God's interactions throughout the Bible are Him using natural means to do things. Miracles, even in the Bible, I think, are pretty rare. And these narratives where there are miracles, they are few and far between throughout biblical history and throughout human history. So I don't think there's much of a contrast between now and then, if that's what you're asking.
But how can you say that? Because I just disagree with that, because Jesus was doing miracles like every day when He was like He was walking on water and all that. Like, there were a lot of miracles being performed.
Yes. But that was like one period in human history. That was a period of like 3 years in human history. That's not like a normative expectation.
Okay, but
and not only that, Jesus Himself would go about saying, don't mention any of this stuff, even when it was rare like that. So what Richard's saying is true. I mean, survey through the Old Testament. Noah's flood, for example, that was a natural event. The parting of the Red Sea, that was a natural event. What type of miracles are we talking about? It's few and far.
Well, if it's a natural event, then what distinguishes it as a miracle?
It doesn't say it's a miracle. That's the problem of the claim.
Okay, and the other thing is, why are we at a disadvantage? If we lived 2,000 years ago when Jesus was walking around, we witnessed him all doing this stuff, and we saw that he rose 3 days later. Yeah, I agree with Jim here. It would give people pause, and a lot more would be like, yep, I believe. I'm okay with that. There are some militant atheists out there that are anti-theist, and no matter what, if Jesus himself, God himself came down and showed him that he existed, they still would not believe. And I think that's a ridiculous position to take.
Yeah, but then notice, Steve, what you just, remember what you just said a moment ago. You said that in order to have that epistemic limit of believing, we would have to have eternal knowledge. Limit of
believing, epistemic knowledge. There's a difference.
No, I mean, I'm sorry, epistemic knowledge of believing, which means it'd have to go into the infinity spectrum.
No, not for belief. No, for knowledge.
To know. Yeah,
I'm not talking about knowledge. I'm talking about belief. I would believe if I was 2,000 years ago and I saw Jesus doing these things, I'd be okay believing it if I saw him rose from the dead. I don't have to say it was knowledge. I can say it was belief.
Yeah, exactly. So notice it's a finite perspective. It's not complete eternal knowledge. So when you said God
you're completely missing my point, General. The people back then had the advantage, if this was the case, because they witnessed these things. We have to go by pure faith that their word is right, and it's been changed so many times. In fact, we all know they didn't write this stuff. It was the scribes that wrote it on behalf.
Where does it change? Where's the evidence that it changed? It never changed.
You don't think?
Show me that it changed.
You don't think the Septuagint, the Hebrew, the Vulgate
are consistent? It's always been consistent.
I beg to differ on that. Even the NIV points out that certain portions can be
show me the changes.
That's been changed.
Yeah, no, those are not changes. What the NIV and what Bible translations are pointing out is where there are differences in manuscripts, which means that there's a scribal error somewhere. But
that's a change.
That's not a
definition.
That's not a deliberate. No, it's not a deliberate
change.
Corruption change. It's all it is a certain.
If you just said change, it could mean deliberate or accidental.
For example,
I don't think the apologetics is required. It's a change.
You can look at the 900. One second. You can look at the Leningrad Codex, the Old Testament, that the oldest we had before the Dead Sea Scroll discovery was 900 AD. All right. Now, critics in the 1800s would point out, "Oh, look, you Christians, when you speak about the prophecies of the Old Testament, being fulfilled with Jesus, what's to know that the fact that we don't have the Old Testament that predates Jesus, because it dates to 900 AD, what's to know that the scribes edited out the Old Testament to make it look like it's predicting Jesus back in the 1st century, but because it can only go to the 900s AD, you can't verify or prove that it's been unaltered." Well, lo and behold,
but I think there's a lot of retcon. I do believe there's a lot of retcon going on.
Not at all, because when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, the only changes, legitimate changes, is due to, for example, you can spell color 2 ways. You just add a U. That's the changes. There's no genuine differences of the wording.
Do you think there was retcon?
There were definitely interpolations, later editions. We can all agree on that.
Sure, definitely interpolations. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what? It's funny. Every time something's translated, even if you get the Bible translated in the King James Version, and then you have it translated to multiple different languages, linguistically, things don't translate equally. There's no one meaning to things. If you take a book and you translate it into another language, certain things change contextually because that's just the way linguistics works.
But it doesn't nullify the original.
I'm not saying it changes the message. I get the theist argument that the message is consistent, that's unaltered. Okay, I'll accept that argument. But that doesn't mean that the writings and the meanings of the writings do not conceptually change subjectively.
Right.
One revision to another, to translation. It does.
That's why it's actually good that people like General that go back to the original texts. Because if you're just going to read it in English, it is going to.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're implying that you go through different languages. Are you like from Hebrew to another?
No. I'm not saying it goes through all the. It doesn't go from this to that to that to that to that. No, things are translated from the original manuscripts into like Korean and Chinese. I get that. I understand that.
I would completely agree with Steve. If there's a genuine change, right? So if the Leningrad Codex was completely different to what we understand, what we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that there was like in that 1,000-year gap of manuscript tradition and transcription and transmission, if there's genuine changes, literally that argument would be like even I would agree with that. But yeah, if there's genuine changes, there's virtually no change.
But I get that for the one manuscript, General. But there are 15, 16 different variations of the Bible. General,
I like how this conversation. I also like how this conversation evolved. First, it was no changes. Then it was some deliberate changes, and now it's changes that don't matter. It's like
I can clarify that. I can clarify that.
Let me finish real quick if I can, Richard, because there are 15 or 16 different Bibles alone on Bible.com. You can look at 15 or 16 different passages and say different
translations.
Translations. Each one is different. That it means that each one has a different, slightly contextual difference.
When you have manuscript transmission, you're talking about genuine copying of what was originally written down. We're not talking about translations here.
Right, and that's when Scrabble errors came in.
So the copying process has been genuinely like on par. Like there's no sudden added word and then that becomes Holy Scripture. Kind of like 1 John 5:7, which is known as the comma
very small changes.
There are copy errors, though, General. You got to admit that there are copy errors.
No, I'm not denying copyist errors. I'm not denying that. I'm talking about legitimate, deliberate changes that would then speak about the fact that this would be hearsay then, like Chinese whispers, that you have a so-called tradition that then changes over time in its meaning and its context and so on. There's been what I'm saying is
I would have to do a little more research on that, General, but I definitely have seen before that
well, give them the research,
putting their own personal viewpoints in a little bit by changing things minutely, retconning it. I believe that completely, and I believe that probably did happen.
I'm sure General could probably give you a paper that could show you how it actually wasn't, because you want to do more research. I'm sure General could hook you up with that crap.
Well, so could Floyd, and Floyd could probably disprove what General's saying.
Yeah, I'd love Floyd to present me with genuine changes.
Yeah,
no, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, generally the only problem, because I like Jim.
MP, hang on. Jim had his hand up. Right. You're ignoring your guest.
Sorry, Jim.
I hate to do this, guys, but I'm going to side with the Christians on this one. The oldest complete manuscript we have is the Codex Sinaiticus. As far as just copy errors go, between then and now, not a really big deal. My problem is the interpolations, the pseudepigraphical additions, and one more thing, while I got the floor, Thaddeus mentioned Josephus. Josephus, yes, was a contemporary. He was a Roman historian. Two things. He only mentioned Jesus twice. They're both pseudepigraphical. They're both later additions. Eusebius in 300 AD added those later. And another damning piece of evidence that he did not say it and he did not believe it, and he knew nothing of Jesus, was the fact that he never converted from Judaism.
Jim, you're going to have to reset because you're modulating. Oh, the easiest way to do that is hit F5. It'll get you. Yeah, if you hit F5, it'll take you out of the hangout and bring you right back. Is he modulating for you guys too?
Yeah, big time. But I think I heard what he said though, which
I heard what he said. That's why I
say it again now.
Jim, but hit F5.
Can you hear me okay now? I hit F5.
You're still robotic.
You're still robotic.
Yeah, F5 it'll just reset your window for your hangout, and it usually fixes that. Yeah, even the live chats, like they're saying you're cutting out.
Check.
Okay,
that's better.
Okay.
There we go.
Respond.
Really? Okay. Sorry.
All that high-tech equipment still have issues.
Jim, let me respond to what you said about Josephus.
Okay.
So I think you're setting up this dichotomy between Josephus was a believer and Josephus didn't write anything about Jesus at all. So it's
correct.
Either.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I think the scholarly position would be a little more nuanced. Like if you look at what I think it's John Mayer has said about Josephus, he thinks that there are certainly interpolations within that section, but there are some earmarks of legitimacy within it. Like for example, Josephus said something like, Jesus called Gentiles to himself, something like that. But the thing is, anybody who's familiar with the story of Jesus would know that that's not the case. Jesus didn't recruit Gentiles, so Josephus would just be retrojecting the current situation onto the past. So that would be one reason that we wouldn't think that a Christian wrote it like that. Another thing would be that toward the end of the account, he seems to be mocking the Christian movement. Like they're still persisting in following this dead man even until today. Like it wouldn't seem like a Christian would write.
Why would he say that? And in the same breath, in the Antiquities of the Jews, I think is his book. Why would he say that? Denigrate Christians, and in the same breath talk about how Jesus was the Savior and that he was the Christ risen.
Yeah, I don't think that Josephus legitimately said that he was the Savior. So, like I said, I think the position...
That was an interpolation. That's all I'm trying to say. The original point was scriptural errors. I'm cool with them. I think they comport to what we're reading right now. What I have a problem with is the interpolations and the later additions.
Okay.
No, but notice, Jim, it's not like we are completely unaware, or we don't know what the original version of Josephus said. That's why you have linguistic sciences and textual criticism to then establish that, okay, now we actually know with 99.9% certainty this is what Josephus said, and then we put the interpolations in brackets to say, yeah, this is obviously a Christian scribe that added that in.
Okay. And what are those in brackets? All Jesus. He only mentioned Jesus twice.
Actually, not really. In fact, it's just the theology of, in this case, resurrection and so on. That's obviously Christian interpolation. So the real dilemma that the critic has to explain is the fact that that Josephus's authentic words do include Jesus.
Actually,
did you just say Josephus's words originally included Jesus? No, they did not. Yeah. They only appear twice, and they're both interpolations.
Okay, Jim, let's talk about the second one. Hold on, Robert. The second one that you're talking about is where Josephus refers to. He's talking about James. He uses Jesus to identify James, right? He says James, the brother of Jesus.
Yeah,
that's pretty benign, isn't it? That doesn't sound like somebody that you're giving reverence to. You're just using him as a point of reference.
Let me just jump in. Sorry, that one may or may not be an interpolation the way I have studied it. That's not the one I have the most problem with. I can even see that one was original. Jesus in Greek is Yeshua, and in Hebrew it's Yoshua, which in English it's Joshua. Did you know Joshua was pretty much the most common name in Judea at the time? So it had to have been a Joshua that was a brother of James.
Hold on, I'm trying to.
Did everyone get that?
Yeah, I got what you said. Okay.
Can you hold on? Can you go? Can you say it one more time?
Oh yeah, he said that there had to have been a Joshua who is the brother of James. Okay, but I'm going to read what Robert would probably agree with this, what we would consider to be the authentic writing of Josephus. And you'll notice that there isn't anything reverent in here. He's not worshiping Jesus, and he's not claiming to be a Christian. Okay, so this is what he said. At this time there appeared Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of people who received the truth with pleasure, and he gained a following both among Jews and among Greek origin. And when Pilate, because of an accusation by the leading men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who loved him previously did not cease to do so. And up until this very day, the tribe of Christians named after him has not died out. Now, you'll notice that this is a lot more nuanced than the original one that we're thinking of, where he's worshiping Jesus and basically claiming to be a Christian. So I'm not sure if you understood where Robert and I were coming from, but I think that would be the more scholarly way to look at this passage rather than to just say, oh, the entire thing is a forgery.
Hey, Richard, you know what?
Yeah.
You have 7 times the amount of people that I had watching on my math hangout earlier on this channel. So screw you. No, good job.
Wait, sorry, I didn't know.
You have 7 times the amount of people that was watching my hangout that I was having on this channel prior to you, which was on math.
Oh yeah, that was because they were all embarrassed because you got taken out to the woodshed by Nephilim Free.
Oh please, yeah.
Whatever.
That'll be the day.
Richard, you did 2 things in that sense. You conceded that he had been grossly changed. Josephus's words were grossly changed from the original, and the original still sounds very pious. And why would a Jew not convert if he had said that?
Because
what would cause him to not convert?
He's not claiming that these things are true. He's claiming that
just wrote it as a historical document. I see.
Sorry, what's that?
He's claiming just as a historical document.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, I see that.
Okay, so he's
Jim, are you ex theist?
of the day.
No, I'm cradle. I've always been a non-believer.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Hey, Robert, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah. I just put the quote, by the way, in the side chat. The authentic reading of Josephus.
You didn't like mine?
Huh?
Oh wait, no, that's a different one. Okay, so here's the other authentic reading of Jesus. Being therefore this kind of person, i.e. a heartless Sadducee, Anisus, thinking he had a favorable opportunity because Festus had died and Albinus was still on his way, called a meeting, literally Sanhedrin, of judges and brought into the brother of Jesus, who was called Messiah, James, by name. Okay, so you can see that Jesus is referred to as somebody who is called Messiah. So
and read the footnote 13 that I posted as well. This is the translator's footnote.
Okay, the translator's footnote. Jewish Antiquities, in Whiston's translation, as translated by Mayer, Marginal Jew, Volume 1, page 57. Mayer's original passage includes phrases, square brackets. The omitted words indicated by the ellipses are in Greek to let scholars know what words are translated. Okay, why do you want me to read that?
No, because he omitted the Christian, the one with the brackets. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
you see the ... there.
Yes, Jesus, who is Messiah. That's authentic. Or rather, Jesus, who is called Messiah. Again, Jim, what we're saying is that Josephus is just kind of reciting the tradition of the day. Like, this is what people believe, basically.
Yeah,
this doesn't seem contemporary though. This seems like he's telling a story that happened. It could be close to the past, but it could also be farther away.
When was Josephus writing this?
I think Josephus died in 60. Is that right? So he didn't. Yeah, he's not a true contemporary.
Yeah,
but it's in line with the gospel accounts.
Yeah,
again, if he's going to say Mark is late, well, here's an example where Mark has to be in the 50s to make sense here.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So, Jim, did you have anything you wanted to bring up during this debate?
No, man. I was just going to feed off you all. This has been...
Yeah, I did tell you.
We're 2 hours in, and I don't even feel like we got started yet.
Yeah, I know. I did tell you specifically.
and you got diversity here, too. You have two theists, a mesotheist, an atheist, yourself an atheist, and a temporal agnostic. So, we got the gamut.
Whoa.
From one extreme to the other. We've got all bases covered.
What was that last one? A what agnostic?
Temporal agnostic.
Okay, I have never heard that before. Now,
hey, I'm a unique.
Okay, that's you, Steve. All right. Let me ask you this: do you think agnosticism and atheism are mutually exclusive, and can you be both?
It depends. Okay, MP, keep muted. MP. Yes or no? It all depends on what you mean by agnosticism. Agnosticism has contextual meaning to it more so than most other words. So if you're using agnosticism as a position between a middle ground between theism and atheism on a scale, on a gradient, then that's fine, right? That's how I do it. However, if somebody wants to use it as a modifier to an atheist position, saying that I don't have epistemic certainty or I don't have knowledge claim of it, which to me is a little superfluous, I have no issue with that.
Wow.
So if you want to say agnostic atheist or agnostic atheist or a Gnostic atheist, those are modifiers. But in my case, I'm using agnosticism as a position.
That is really good. Yeah, I like that. I've never heard it explained that way before.
You know what? Dr. Alex Malpass, who's an atheist PhD, logic expert, he actually has a really good page on the different types of gradients and types of landscapes. And he shows on each landscape what positions there are, if you can have a knowledge, if you have a belief. It's very, very well done. It's called The Use of Reason. I'll send it to you.
Oh, on the so going in line with that, I always use the Dawkins scale. I don't know if you all are familiar with it. It's 1 to 7 being, So, as with regard to just the concept of a god or gods, any gods in general, I'm about a 4, 4.5, maybe a 5. So that's a very, very weak atheist. But with regard to the Yahweh of the Bible, I'm a 6.99999.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I'm not a big fan of the Dawkins scales for other reasons, but I'll utilize it. Like for example, if you ask me, Steve, what do you think about the young Earth creationist God? In other words, is that if there's a God that's contingent upon Noah's Ark and contingent upon speciation from the animals from the Ark, I'm not even a 6.99. I'm 9. It doesn't happen. That God has been disproven. That's why young Earth creation. That's why I fight against younger creationism. I'm okay with like General, who's an old Earth creationist or a theistic evolutionist. Dr. Ross, who's a friend of mine, he's an old Earth creationist. We banter, but I'm not so much 100% against it, right? Because I don't know, but I can disprove the young Earth creationist God.
Hugh Ross was on our show about a month ago.
He's coming. He's back on mine next month.
Oh, nice.
Oh, really? You interviewed Hugh Ross?
Yep.
Did you like him?
Oh, wow.
It was a side interview by one of my friends, but I've got it mirrored on my channel. We do a monthly atheist Christian book club here in town, and we switch each month. We do an atheist book, then a Christian book, and we did Hugh Ross's, I forget the name of the damn book now. It's
Improbable Planet?
Improbable Planet, yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, we did so we had him on Skype, and the one for September 1st is going to be David Fitzgerald Nailed, and we got a hold of him. So we always try to reach out to the authors too.
Yeah,
so,
we do the same thing. Yeah,
what were your thoughts?
He was an awesome dude. I really like him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what you think about Planet? I'm not
Planet?
finished it yet.
Yeah.
I have to finish it before he comes on. That's I told him I would, but obviously,
I like that he gets more shit from Christians than he does from atheists.
It's so funny. Is so far. I'm not seeing that really any problems with the book. I understand his argument. He's not really approaching it from a huge Christian point of view. He's actually really approaching it from a probabilistic.
He's gone full science.
Yeah, and so if people like condemn his writings, I don't think they've really read this particular book because it's not really hardcore Christianity by any means.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, and then I had a book sent to me from Dr. Fuzz Rana. He's also from Reasons to Believe.
Okay.
You know who he is? He sent me his book called Dinosaur Blood in the Age of the Earth. And again, I was impressed. The ending, I thought, different. He is, I think, reading more into it. But he at least points out why, we found collagen, how it was preserved, Dr. Mary Schweitzer's work, what her findings were. She was a guest, and she confirmed, a lot of that stuff. So I like Reasons to Believe. I think that they do try to be scientific to a point. I do think they're honest. Do I agree with them on everything? No, but it's a hell of a lot different than somebody like from AIG or ICR. I'll tell you that right here now.
Dr. Ross, there's a whole chapter on the fine-tuning argument. We talked at length about that at the book club, and I had to admit, now I've been asked this more than once on the show, what is the one argument Christians have that you have the most problem with? And it is definitely that fine-tuning argument, boy. I mean, that one, the only ad hoc arguments I have against that is a multiverse theory and maybe something about like that I forget what it's called, but the notion that we wouldn't be here if we didn't know.
Oh, the anthropic principle.
The weak anthropic principle. Yes, that's
yeah. See, I'm not a big fan of the fine-tuning arguments. I think that's one of the weaker arguments actually, because one, a lot of these variables that people talk about, there are some leeway in them, but two, we are a product of what the variables are for the universe. As the guy that wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy said, what's his name?
Douglas Adams.
Douglas Adams, yeah, he wrote, the whole puddle analogy, is the puddle specifically designed to hold that much amount of water, or the water is just a natural result of the displacement from the road, though? I think that's
a weak argument, though. I mean, I don't really have a strong argument against the fine tuning, though.
Hey, General.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's all I had.
No, General, we're talking about fine tuning. You hear what Steve said? I want to hear your reaction.
No, I agree with Steve. I reckon
I pay General well to agree with me.
No, but Steve, at the same time, I don't know if you've seen the 300 categorical that certain constants, certain things that take place in the universe can only happen that one way. And Hugh Ross has categorized like 300 different parameters that really.
Yeah, I would think that's more along the lines of about 25 or 26 actually. Yeah.
26.
Yeah.
He's cataloged at least 300.
Yeah, I think you could still them down. I mean, if you're looking at natural units, right? I mean, those are all related, like Planck's constant.
Yeah,
Planck's
that's
time,
another thing. I'm not talking about.
I mean, you could distill those down even more. But I mean, there are ways of, if you don't even have to know much about math, you can actually use qualitative analysis, as you know, because you're a physicist, that define natural units from any other natural units, right? It's the universe's way of measuring things.
One second. So, what chapter have you come up to in Improbable Planet? Because how would you explain the coincidences of, India moving a certain direction, the Antarctic moving a certain direction, the planet forming a certain way, the moon colliding event happening a certain way, right size, the moon being the right size, like at minimum, you're talking about 300 different parameters on top of the physical constants down at the quantum scale that will then make this one particular planet have life.
But what happens when we find out if life's ubiquitous in the universe?
But then at the same time, I don't have a problem with that. But you and I had a discussion before that if there's no life elsewhere, you yourself admitted, then yeah, the God hypothesis would.
Right, but if there's life that's ubiquitous throughout the universe, then why is it not tuned for that type of life?
I know. So, but the question is there life elsewhere?
Well, I mean, I believe due to the Drake equation is a high probability, but I did tell you, and I stand by it, that if we are the only life in the entire universe, I would give pause of some kind of special creation for that.
Exactly, and that's what Hugh Ross wants to argue.
That's true. Yeah, I agree with Steve with that, like 100%.
Me too.
But you see,
I'm glad you do.
He's arguing. But that's what he's arguing in his new book.
Yeah, no, I know, and he also argues that statistically we should have been wiped out many times over. The last 5 major extinctions, we barely made it through. Life barely made it through, and there are some events that no life could exist. I mean, if you have an event so massive that the mantle becomes liquefied, no life is going to exist. And so
I feel like I'm going to spoil it, but since it's it's the show on this discussion, at the end of his book, I would definitely urge you to take special note of how he ends it, because then he, in light of all the physical going on, like how planet Earth comes to be and so on, he then surveys, demonstrated in the biblical text, that then leads into this Jesus figure, and then basically does a comparison on the impossibilities of life, and then how the events that do take place in the Bible cannot be ignored. That there's some form of divine agency in both worlds.
I do my due diligence. I want to read it thoroughly. I'm taking notes.
No, I know.
Yeah, so.
But I reckon you love the last chapter, the way he ends it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, I'm glad MP answered that, and same with Jim. There's only a fraction of what I call militant atheists out there. We know who they are, and these atheists to me are irrational as much as any Christian out there I've ever seen. And they just have the most. I've actually had Christians tell me, or excuse me, not Christians. I mean, these militant atheists say things like, "Well, they have no beliefs at all, like no beliefs. They don't even believe that they exist." And I'm like, that's just you're just taking something to an extreme, to absurdity, or that, like you said, if there's no life in the entire universe, it wouldn't give them pause for special creation. By definition, we'd be special.
Yeah.
So I think that people need to have a little more rationality in their conversations, and I'm glad there's people like Jim here who's rational atheist, because that's what I'm looking for in a conversation. Irrational people, whether you're an irrational atheist or a rational theist, it just drives me nuts.
Could you not be a militant rational atheist?
Yeah, I guess you could, but sure.
Yeah, they're rare. I think they're rare because they just tend to go right off the rails. And I mean, there's a difference between the FFRF and the American Atheists. You can look at them and you can see which ones are thinking rationally and which ones aren't.
What's the FFRF?
What's that?
The Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Yeah, that's right. Freedom from Religion.
Yeah, and the American Atheist is headed by David Silverman, who's he's self-admitted firebrand. He's confrontational. He, I compare him to types like Anthony Magnabosco, who I like to cite. I like to think that I'm more on in his realm of listening to actually listening, and let's build some bridges. Let's come to some common ground instead of just attack.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Matter of fact, it's funny you mentioned that, because almost every time somebody mentions something like American Atheist, they're the ones least likely to actually listen to what you have to say.
Exactly. And don't get me started on their views on social justice policies.
Oh yeah, of course that has to be.
Atheism Plus was a terrible idea.
Right.
We can all agree on that, I think.
Yeah, even PC Myers has kind of distanced himself, who is also a friend of ours.
I had lunch with him in Germany in 2012, and this was before I even knew anything. It all exploded in my face, and I learned about the Dublin incident in 2011, which started all of this. The elevator. I'm sure we all know what we're talking about.
Refresh my memory.
No.
The European Atheist Convention in 2011 was in Dublin. That was where Rebecca Watson, after a night, she's a
yeah. No, I know she is.
Okay,
yeah, no, not Rebecca.
All right.
Yeah.
She spoke at the conference. She was met in an elevator at 4:30 in the morning, coming back from a bar, going to her hotel room. And she was asked politely by a fan, a spectator, if she would like to come back to his room for coffee and to discuss it further. Now, yes, he probably was hitting on her, but she blew it out of proportion. And then this is where the hashtag not all came from. I can't believe we're getting on this.
No,
you know what? Let's not do the social justice.
Yeah, no, I do remember vaguely this now. And but in a nutshell, I like PZ's biology. I never liked his social justice stuff, but he's distanced himself from that recently. And I tell you what, every time he's been in our hangouts and every time he's been in my hangouts talking to us, he doesn't mention any of that stuff. And it's not been a problem.
Has he shied away from it? Because him and Carrier had a huge stance on it at one time. Now it sounds like, yeah, he was an Atheism Plus. He was one of the centerpieces of the advocacy movement.
Really? That sucks.
Oh, you didn't know that? I know. Well,
no.
When you're talking about I'm not a mythicist, but when he's talking in his wheelhouse, good. Just don't let him get off on Atheism Plus.
I see. I think I agree with you on that. But it's the same token, like Aaron. I think the world of Arn. One of the, when you want to learn biology and you want to learn phylogeny, Arn's your man. Keep him away from philosophy. It's not his strong point.
Actually, I have to go back to some of my videos and see if he even touched on philosophy. That's a good thing to look at.
Steve, I was thinking I'd like to debate Aaron Raw and just hit him with all philosophy, no science at all.
He hates philosophy stuff.
My interview with him was over. He's running for Texas State Senate, and we talked about Uber and Airbnb and the share economy. So we didn't even touch on philosophy at all.
I can kind of relate to the whole not interest in deep philosophy thing, though. Some people just have their areas of expertise. Personally, I think it just bores me.
Ooh, two Steve McRaes.
I vouch for this guy, Steve McRae. He's trying.
This is a special treat.
Who's the real McRae?
It's ghosting. It'll go away.
This is the two powers in heaven right here.
Yeah, this is every woman's dream too. Me.
Is there a way? And now are spectators chatting somewhere? Because I don't see that. Is there a way you can see that?
Yeah, go to the watch link, and you'll.
Is it off to the left?
Yeah. See, like Eric W. says, I enjoyed the discussion of biblical history and hermeneutics. Then came along Steve to make it another philosophical circle jerk.
Actually,
they love me. I love you too, Eric.
I agree with Eric.
I can't stand the religiosity stuff. I like to talk about science and philosophy.
Yeah.
Steve's circle jerks are the best circle jerks. You know it, boy. You know it.
Yeah, another vaguely sexual joke from Steve.
Yeah, it's nothing vague.
Okay, I am getting pretty tired, so I think I'm gonna shut this down now. I don't know if you guys want to make another one and keep the conversation going, but as for this one, I think we can shut it down.
No, but
my Google Drive.
I do want to get Atheist Edge's information. I'm gonna go subscribe to you. I assume you have a YouTube channel.
I can type it in. Let me just say it. Let me see.
Yeah, promote your shit, man.
All right, here we go. Ready? I got it written down already. I'm on YouTube. It's Atheist Edge. Facebook /Atheist Edge. Twitter @Atheist Edge. Patreon /Atheist Edge. I'm on Stitcher, iTunes, and VidMe @Atheist Edge. I got my book here. Most people believe in God. Can they all be wrong? I've got another book. It detects Islam. It's under a fake name, so just text me and I'll send you that information. So I don't want to. I don't want to fatwa against
so what you're saying is you really have no social footprint.
And if you are a first-time Lyft user, download the app and put in promo code Atheist Edge. You get your first ride free.
Oh. Yeah. I was just going to ask you to submit
that was hilarious because our friend D's Nuts 42069, he's always memeing that kind of thing, like making up fake plugs and just going on and on. It's pretty funny.
Oh, you're saying that was fake plugs?
Wow.
Can you read the group chat there?
YouTube, Steve McRae.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, got it.
And this is also, no, it's not I created this channel, but it's a
nice
group channel.
I will subscribe.
I am the host, quote, owner of the Great Debate Community.
You're the god.
I am the god.
Yes.
Let me ask this.
Well, you're the moderator's god. Richard's the moderator for this particular hangout.
I know there is a Great Debate. It's kind of like a TED Talk. Are you guys affiliated with the actual Great Debate or no? Is that separate?
That's separate.
Oh, okay.
However, we are starting to get bigger. We have 1,000 members almost right now.
The Great Debate Community?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. We're let's see. The Living Dinosaur put a plug to us.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was a big plug. Go watch his channel.
He's awesome.
King Crocoduck on it.
Yeah, King Crocoduck put a huge. But King Crocoduck debates on my channel, right? I mean.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, Apologia. You know, we get a lot of shout outs.
Even Aaron Rock came on.
Aaron Rock put it on his Facebook. Yeah, so I mean, we're getting notoriety. For sure.
What put me on the map was, I don't know if you're familiar with Zachary Moore. He's a doctor of molecular biology. I had him on very early on, and he does the Apologia podcast and the Evolution 101, I think it is, podcast. He's pretty well known, but yeah.
Well, I am sending you an invite to join our little happy community because I like you.
Awesome. I like you guys. Let's do this again.
Okay,
so when you get it, just accept it, and it'll be all good. Richard, you're a great moderator, dude. You're God, though, in here.
Yeah, man. Go ahead. Wrap it up.
I'm booting right now as I wrap it up.
So wrap it up.
Okay, thanks everyone for being here. I especially want to thank Atheist Edge, our friend Jim, who we all just met. Seems like a great guy, really easy to talk to. You guys should check out his channel, all those long series of plugs he just mentioned. I don't remember all of them. There was something that I wanted to respond to, and I'll just close with this. I saw somebody in the live chat say something like, "Man, this theology stuff is boring." So I'm gonna end with a quote that'll trigger all of you and make all of you comments about me. It's from okay, quiet. It's from Charles Spurgeon. He wrote, "He who often thinks of God will have a larger mind than the man who simply plods around this narrow globe. The most excellent study for expanding the soul is the science of Christ and Him crucified and the knowledge of the Godhead and the glorious Trinity. Nothing will so enlarge the intellect, nothing so magnify the whole of the soul of man as a devout, earnest, continued investigation of the great subject of the deity. Amen." Good night, guys.